What does the word home mean to you? Is it four walls and a roof? Is it the place you grew up? Or is it something more? A feeling of safety, of belonging? Now, imagine being told you had to build a home in a place that was designed to be the opposite of all that. A place designed to be a prison, a punishment, a desolate wasteland at the very end of the earth. This is the story of how Australia's first homes weren't just built with timber and mud, but with something far stronger, the sheer, stubborn, bloody-minded resilience of people who had lost everything but their will to live. It's a yarn not just about survival, but about creation, about how you make a life in a place that was meant to be a living hell. Our story picks up with a bloke we know, a young fella from Somerset we're calling Thomas. He's done his time. And 7 long, brutal years of back-breaking labour under the harsh Australian sun. He survived the voyage from hell, the lashings, and the near starvation of the early settlement. He's finally handed his ticket of leave. He's an emancipist, now a free man, but free in the world's largest open-air prison, 15,000 kilometres from the only home he'd ever known. As part of the deal, he's granted a small plot of land on the fringes of the settlement, out towards Parramatta. A gift from the Crown. A gift from the Crown. But you have to wonder if it felt like a gift, or just another punishment. It wasn't a neat little field ready for the plough. It was a rugged, tangled patch of Australian bush. The trees were iron-hard gums that shattered English axe heads. The ground was baked clay, and the air was filled with the sounds of creatures he still didn't have names for. This patch of dirt wasn't a promise. It was a challenge. A dare from the land itself to see if he could tame it. Oh. For months, he worked it alone, a solitary figure battling a continent. He made slow progress, clearing a small patch, building a lean-to shelter that did little to keep out the rain or the strange noises of the night. It was a lonely, back-breaking existence. Then, a ship arrived. One of the vessels of the infamous Second Fleet, a journey so horrific they called it the Death Fleet. Off that ship stumbled the survivors, more like ghosts than people, and among them was a young Irish woman named Eleanor. She'd been transported for a crime she didn't commit, a victim of a system that didn't care for truth, only for clearing out its jails. She had survived a voyage that killed a quarter of its passengers, and she arrived in this strange, sunburnt land with nothing but the rags on her back and a fire in her eyes that refused to be extinguished. Thomas saw in her the same lost, terrified soul he had been all those years ago. He offered her a kind word, a share of the meager vegetables he'd managed to grow. It wasn't much, but in this place, a small act of kindness was worth more than gold. It wasn't a grand romance like you read about in books. It was something quieter, but deeper. A partnership born of shared trauma and a mutual, unspoken understanding of what it took to survive this place. They decided to face that stubborn plot of land together, and so they began to build a home. The work was relentless. From dawn till dusk, they cleared the land. The sound of Thomas's axe striking the hard timber echoed through the bush. Eleanor would gather stones, dig at the stubborn soil with crude tools, and plant the precious few seeds they had. They failed more often than they succeeded. English seeds withered in the harsh sun. Strange grubs ate their crops. Flash floods washed away their work. There must have been countless times they slumped down in exhaustion at the end of the day, covered in dirt and sweat, and wondered if it was all for nothing. Slowly, painstakingly, they built a hut. Not a cottage, not a house. A hut. They learned to use what the land gave them. They used the wattle tree's flexible branches to weave a frame, and mixed mud, clay, and grasses to make the daub for the walls. The roof was sheets of stringy bark, held down with stones. It wasn't much, barely more than a shed by today's standards, but perhaps for the first time since they were torn from their homes, they had a door they could close against the world. It was theirs. They had made it. Inside, there was a packed earth floor, a rough-hewn table, and a fireplace that filled the small space with smoke. But it was a sanctuary. They weren't living in a vacuum. Around them, a new society was taking shape. A society unlike any other on Earth. It was a community of emancipists, looked down on by the red-coated soldiers and the pure merinos, the free settlers who arrived with money and status. But among themselves, these former convicts, these stainers, forged a powerful community. They had to. Fruta. They relied on each other in a way the free settlers never could. If a neighbor's hut burned down, everyone would pitch in to rebuild it. They traded goods, a bag of potatoes for some mended tools, a side of kangaroo for some cloth. They developed a unique language, a slang full of dark humor and wry observations. This was the birth of mateship, born not of choice, but of sheer, desperate necessity. A year after they married, Eleanor gave birth to their first child, Ard, a daughter. Imagine bringing a new life into a world like that, a place built on punishment and despair. It's an act of pure, defiant hope, isn't it? This baby wasn't a convict. She was a currency lass, born free on Australian soil. She was a native of this strange, wild place. And with her birth, something fundamental shifted. The little hut on the edge of the settlement was no longer just a shelter for two survivors. It was a family home. It held a future. Life was still a monumental struggle. There was the constant threat of drought, the fear of losing their crops and starving. There were encounters with the local indigenous people, the Darug, which were often fraught with misunderstanding and fear on both sides. These were people whose land this had been for millennia, now watching these strange white ghosts build their ugly little huts and fences. It was a complex, often tragic, clash of two worlds that neither side was equipped to understand. But Thomas and Eleanor endured. Their small farm grew. They got a cow. They planted an orchard of fruit trees. Their daughter grew up strong and wild. With her mother's fiery spirit and her father's quiet resilience, she knew the names of the gum trees and the calls of the birds. This land wasn't a punishment to her. It was the only home she'd ever known. What Thomas and Eleanor built wasn't just a farm. It was a life reclaimed from the ashes of the ones that had been stolen from them. They, and thousands like them, weren't just serving time. They were laying the foundations of a new world, brick by painful brick. The authorities in London had envisioned a vast, orderly prison, but they hadn't counted on the incredible, stubborn human need to create a home, to build a community, to hope for a better future for their kids. For a better future for their kid. That is the true legacy of the convicts. It's the story of the battler. It's the foundation of that Aussie spirit that looks at an impossible task and says, well, better give it a crack. It's a legacy of making do, of helping your mates, of having a healthy disrespect for the high and mighty who've never had to get their hands dirty. It was forged in the heat and the dust by people who had every reason to give up, but chose to build instead. They took a hell on earth, and through their own sweat and tears and grit, they turned it into a home. And that's a yarn worth remembering.